So I recently posted a video on my Instagram page which showed a turning model of Breakthrough, which was my clay work maquette that I had made for my last show. And I posted it and I mentioned that I now have it as an NFT. Now, I recently got very interested in the NFT technology because it's essentially the first time that artists have the ability to actually turn a piece of digital art, like a video, a scan or 3D model or photograph, and they're able to make it one of one. They can actually turn it into a unique piece of artwork that is on the internet, and someone can collect that work. Now, for me, I found that really interesting because I've actually always avoided digital art. Coming from a traditional artistic background, I've actually always found it a little bit strange. There was always like I don't know, for lack of a better word, I always found digital art kind of cringy. It didn't really have a deeper meaning to me. But what I thought was really fascinating recently from discovering NFTs was the ability for me to, for example, take my original clay maquette, which was going to be lost due to the fact that it's just so fragile, but I was able to scan that model in and then actually put it on the internet and tokenize it and turn it into a one-of-one piece of digital art that is now stored on the blockchain. If you know anything about blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, Google's there to fill in the blanks. But I think it's just an incredible area moving forward for so many artists to get involved in. The technology originally fascinated me because it allows for you to make a digital one-of-one piece of work that, essentially only has one unique ownership. I think that's incredible because usually on the internet, things can be right-clicked and saved to desktop. You can take a JPEG and you can save it. But with the technology of an NFT, you can make it completely unique. And I find that fascinating because you only have one owner of that NFT token, which represents that piece of artwork. So for example, in my atelier, I make a series of different clay works, and those are maquettes that I make, and I will then use them for other projects that I will inspire on, for scale-ups and so on. But what's fantastic is, for example, a lot of my clay works will eventually be destroyed because when I take a plaster cast of one of them, it's never the same as the original clay. The original clay has got such a nice kind of powdery, honest, earthy feeling to it. But what I found fascinating was I could essentially 3D scan the entire clay model at a very, very, very high resolution. And then I could turn it into a digital NFT, which then kind of lives forever on the blockchain. And there's only one of them. It's one of one. And I found that absolutely fascinating because then you can essentially, you never lose what that piece actually kind of, in a way, felt like. Okay, it's not the exact piece, but you still have a digital memory of it, a sort of a digital twin. And the potential of that is just, well, for me, mind-boggling because there's so many things you can do with this technology moving forward. And I think many artists will take it considerably further than where it is being used now. I mean, I think in many respects, my first sort of knee-jerk reaction to the idea of an NFT as a physical sculptor, kind of, I looked at it and I thought, well, this is totally useless. Why would I ever be involved in this? And also, why would other artists who make actual things be interested in this? But your mind starts to shift when you start to understand that essentially an NFT is just another medium. It's another area to express a piece of your artwork in. So it's, you make a bronze cast, you make a plaster cast of something, you make a stone copy of something, but then you also have the ability to make an NFT. I don't think for me personally, I would be happy to just make a series of NFTs. I mean, I'm a sculptor who's very much based in the physical, but I think it's wonderful to have the ability to capture a sort of beginning of a sculpture process like a maquette and be able to share that as a unique one-of-one NFT that then sort of lives in the digital world. I think as a very much a physical sculptor myself, there's always that feeling of, okay, but if you turn a 3D model into an NFT and someone buys that or someone collects that, how do they then go on and display that work? And essentially, it's sort of like this amazing technology is here, but how do you actually how do you admire or look at these digital collections? I mean, you can look at them on your phone, you can look at them on a monitor screen, but the thing that I think is really interesting is where technology is going in the sort of altered reality headsets and certain things that allow you to project holograms into spaces. And I think we're going to see more and more of this moving forward as time goes on, where exhibitions will be very much digitized. You know, you'll have physical pieces of work in there, but there will also be displaying of sort of like holographic models, you know, either on screens, but also in actual 3D space. The technology exists. You have to wear a sort of type of headset with a lens that allows you to see these objects in the space, but the technology exists. And I think moving forward, we're going to be seeing more and more of that. Do I think that NFTs will change the fine art scene? I think it's a really difficult question. I think overall technology will change the fine art scene. I think the notion of gallery and artist are going to be quite blurred when you've got a number of possibilities for a lot of things going more and more digital. But I think what's really fascinating is the potential for a painter to have a series of different paintings, but then create NFTs of them. Or the painter can have a series of different works, but he will make just an NFT of some of the original sketches of the work. And people can collect those, or people can buy into those if they're interested in having these digital assets that the painter has put out there. I think essentially it will allow an artist's body of work to be deeper, because he's not only exploring the physical act of making something, but he's also playing around with bits of work on the metaverse as well, which, whether we like it or not, technology is absolutely growing at a rate that is just almost so fast that you can barely follow it. And I think we've seen more and more of that growth happening at an increased speed over the coronavirus period. As people have spent more and more time involved in computers and technology to communicate with one another, it's actually kind of sped up the evolution in this space. So I think it's going to change the art world quite significantly. Whether it will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think it's growing at such a rate that it certainly could have a significant impact in the next few years. I mean, already it's having an impact, but I think when you look at, for example, a number of big auction houses that are now dealing NFTs, I think it becomes quite an interesting and valid medium for expression in the arts. If you're looking at the current NFT space right now, it's being primarily used for collectibles. There's different creators out there who are creating multiple different collectible pieces of work. You see them, they're all relatively similar, and they all have slight changes. Now, for me personally, it's not something I would get involved in. There's not enough of the actual art element there. It's purely just to buy and trade with like-minded people. So I think from a fine art perspective, though, someone who's coming from a more traditional fine arts background, I think there's huge room to grow in this space. I think the fine art world is still very, very early on this and potentially haven't even seen the real strengths of what can be done with NFTs. But I think overall, in time, fine artists will begin creating NFTs alongside of their paintings or sculptures, or movie producers will create small clips that they'll turn into NFTs or whatever. And of course, people will who are fans of that space or of that artist will naturally go to want to collect or own a certain part of that artist's work. I mean, if, for example, there was a series of painters and artists that I admire, or sculptors, and they released a series of NFTs, I wouldn't think for a second why wouldn't I collect something there? I think it's really interesting. I would definitely be interested in starting an NFT collection, but currently there aren't really enough artists that I admire coming into this space yet. But it's still early days. I mean, there's still so much to grow in this area. I also like collecting things, and I think it's interesting to collect art, and there's something that gives me joy in that space. Not that I have a huge collection myself, but what is interesting is to look into, why do people collect? Why do they want to associate with a certain artist that has a certain message? Why do they want to buy into that piece of work that they, feel a connection with? I mean, very often in the first place, people will buy into an artist's collection based on what the artist stands for. So it's almost like on a deeper spiritual level. It doesn't even matter so much for some people what the actual piece of artwork looks like. So I think collection goes a lot deeper, because it's always that question of, but you don't then own a physical piece of work as an NFT. It's something that's in space. It's something that's in the metaverse. But I think you have to come down to the absolute fundamentals of that as well, and look at why people collect. There's many different types of collectors. I mean, some people like to collect purely for bragging rights. Other people like to collect because they really love that piece of work but don't care that much for the artist. But it's definitely an interesting thing to look into, and it's made me think more and more recently about, why do we collect, actually, as human beings? Why are we interested in doing that? Because there's something quite deep in us that makes us become very interested in collecting, and usually in the fact that something becomes scarce. The scarcity of a piece of work becomes far more interesting, and I think that's an area that is interesting to think about. I mean, on the subject of collecting, I think it's really interesting to think about, because many of the different people who collect my work are actually, they're collecting a piece of the sculpture that, hopefully they find looks appealing or touches them in a certain aesthetic way. But they're also sort of joining me and connecting with me for the principles and the sort of deeper principles of what I stand for, and what I'm also kind of fighting against, or fighting for, let's say, in the actual current cultural setting that we find ourselves in. For example, a number of people that collect my work solely because I'm very much against the current art trends. I find what's going on in the art world today extremely boring, and a lot of my work is essentially an opposite to that. So people are kind of, are very much intrigued by those principles, and not just in the fact that I'm also very much interested in making sculpture actually have a kind of strength and power in it, or finding a kind of balance and power in sculpture, but also because I think that's the wonderful thing between a collector and the artist, is they can join you on a mission that you are really, really passionate about and care deeply and strongly about. And so it's this joining of the collector and the artist, and that well, really, those kind of connections that I've made with a number of my collectors have been great. I mean, it's just, you have that person that knows you through your work, and you get to know them on a much deeper level because of that.